My father never acknowledged me. Not once in 30 years. I was the product of an affair he had with my mother, a brief relationship that ended before I was born. He was married, with 2 legitimate children, a son and a daughter, and a reputation to protect.
So he denied me.
Paid my mother off, signed away his rights, and pretended I didn't exist. I grew up knowing his name, seeing his face in the newspaper, watching his legitimate children enjoy the life that should have been half mine. And then he died. And his children, in their greed, made a mistake they'd spend the rest of their lives regretting. Let me rewind. My name is Maya. I'm 32, a high school teacher, and I've spent my entire life as a secret. My mother told me the truth when I was 12, a tearful confession about a man she'd loved, a man who'd chosen his family over her, a man who'd paid her to disappear. She showed me his picture, told me his name, explained why we never talked about him. I coped the way kids do, by building walls, by pretending it didn't matter, by focusing on the life I had. My mother was enough. She loved me fiercely, worked 2 jobs to support us, never let me feel unwanted. I didn't need a father, but I knew who he was. Richard Vance. A successful businessman, a community leader, a family man. I'd see his name in the paper, his face on the news, and feel a complicated mix of curiosity and resentment. His children, my half-siblings, went to private schools, took fancy vacations, lived in a world I could only imagine. I never reached out. What was the point? He'd made his choice. I wasn't going to beg for scraps. 30 years passed. I built my own life, a career I loved, friends who became family, a quiet contentment. I thought I'd made peace with the past. Then, 6 months ago, Richard died. I saw the obituary online, a glowing tribute to a man I'd never known. I felt nothing, or so I told myself. A week later, I got a letter from a law firm. Richard's estate was being settled, and I was mentioned in the will. Not as a beneficiary, as a potential claimant who needed to be disqualified before the assets could be distributed. His legitimate children were demanding a DNA test. They wanted proof that I wasn't related, that I had no claim, that they could keep everything for themselves. I laughed when I read it. After 30 years of denial, they were finally acknowledging my existence, only to try to erase me again. I called the lawyer, a woman named Priya, who specialized in estate disputes. She explained the situation. Richard Vance's will leaves everything to his 2 legitimate children, Sarah and Michael. But there's a clause that requires any other potential heirs to be disqualified through DNA testing. They're using that clause to force you to prove you're not his daughter. But I am his daughter. My mother told me everything. That may not matter legally. Without proof, you're just a claimant. They're hoping you'll refuse the test, or that the results will be inconclusive and they can proceed with the distribution. What if I take the test and it proves I'm his daughter? Then you have standing to challenge the will. You could claim a share of the estate, potentially a significant one. I thought about it. 30 years of silence, 30 years of denial, and now they wanted me to prove I didn't exist. The irony was almost too much. I'll take the test, I said. Not for the money, for the truth. The test was simple. A cheek swab, a mailed envelope, a few weeks of waiting. I didn't tell my mother. She'd died 5 years ago, and I couldn't bear to think about what she'd say. The results arrived in a sealed envelope. I opened it with trembling hands. The probability of paternity, 99.97%. Richard Vance was my father. I was his daughter. The secret was finally, legally, undeniably true. I called Priya. It's positive. I'm his daughter. She was quiet for a moment. Maya, this changes everything. You're not just a claimant now. You're an heir. Under the laws of intestacy, you may be entitled to a share of the estate equal to his legitimate children. But the will leaves everything to them. A will can be challenged if it excludes a child without justification, especially if that child was born out of wedlock and never acknowledged. We have a strong case. I felt a surge of emotion, anger, grief, vindication. They'd spent 30 years pretending I didn't exist. Now they'd have to face me. The legal battle began. Sarah and Michael, My half-siblings were furious. Their lawyer argued that the will was clear, that I had no rights, that the DNA test proved nothing. But Priya countered with evidence of my father's affair, his payments to my mother, his decades of denial. The case was headed to court. Then something unexpected happened. In the process of gathering evidence, Priya discovered a secret my father had hidden for decades. A secret that would change everything. Priya called me on a Tuesday afternoon. Her voice was different, excited but cautious. Maya, I found something your father hid for decades. It's going to change everything. I gripped the phone, my heart pounding. What is it? A second will. Dated 20 years ago, before his legitimate children were born. In it, he leaves everything to you. His firstborn. His only child at the time. I felt the world tilt. A second will. Leaving everything to me. But why would he hide it? And why would he later cut me out? Priya explained. The second will had been drafted when my father was young, before he married, before he had his legitimate children. In it, he acknowledged me as his daughter and left his entire estate, which was modest at the time, to me. But as his wealth grew and his family expanded, he'd apparently changed his mind. The later will, the one leaving everything to Sarah and Michael, had been drafted after his marriage. But here was the twist. The second will had never been formally revoked. It was still a valid legal document. And under the laws of our state, a later will doesn't automatically invalidate an earlier one unless it explicitly says so. The second will was still in play. So, I could claim under the second will?
I asked. Possibly.
But it's complicated. The second will leaves you his entire estate, but that estate was much smaller 20 years ago. The assets have grown significantly since then. A court would have to determine how to interpret it. What about Sarah and Michael? They'll fight it. They'll fight it with everything they have. But if we can prove that your father never intended to disinherit you, that the later will was signed under pressure or with incomplete information, we might have a case. I spent the next few weeks in a daze, trying to process this new information. My father, the man who denied me for 30 years, had once acknowledged me, had once, briefly, wanted me to have everything. What changed? Priya dug deeper. She subpoenaed my father's emails, his financial records, his personal correspondence. What she found painted a troubling picture. My father's wife, Sarah, and Michael's mother had been the driving force behind his change of heart. Emails showed her pressuring him to cut me out, to protect their children's inheritance. She'd threatened divorce, exposure, scandal. He'd capitulated, signing the later will to keep the peace. But there was more. A letter, unsent, found in his personal files. Dated just months before his death, it was addressed to me. My dearest Maya, I've never had the courage to say this to your face, but I need you to know, I've always loved you. From the moment I learned you existed, I wanted to be part of your life. But I was weak. I let fear and pressure dictate my choices. I let your mother down. I let you down. I can't undo the past. But I want you to know that you are my daughter, and I am proud of you. I've watched from afar your graduation, your career, your life. You've become someone remarkable, and I had nothing to do with it. I've made arrangements to ensure you're taken care of after I'm gone. I hope someday you can forgive me. With all my love.
Dad.
I read the letter through tears.
He'd loved me.
He'd watched me. He'd wanted to reach out. But he'd been too weak, too scared, too trapped. The letter changed everything. It wasn't just evidence. It was proof that my father's later will didn't reflect his true wishes. It was proof that I was never meant to be excluded. Priya filed a motion to introduce the letter and the second will as evidence. Sarah and Michael's lawyers fought back, arguing that the letter was irrelevant, that the second will was outdated, that I was just a gold digger trying to steal what wasn't mine. The court scheduled a hearing for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, the media got wind of the story. Secret daughter claims inheritance in bitter family battle. The headlines were everywhere. Sarah and Michael, furious, gave interviews painting me as an opportunist. I stayed silent, letting the evidence speak for itself. Then, a week before the hearing, something else happened. Something none of us expected. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, curious onlookers, and a row of family members who'd taken sides. Sarah and Michael sat at the respondents' table with their lawyers, their faces masks of cold determination. I sat with Priya, my hands clasped in my lap, my heart pounding. My mother's sister, my Aunt Rachel, sat in the gallery behind me, holding my childhood photo album as if it were a shield. The judge, a woman named Morrison with a reputation for fairness, called the court to order. This is a case about love, loss, and the complex legacy of a man who couldn't face the truth. Priya delivered our opening statement with quiet power. Your Honor, this case is not about money. It's about acknowledgement. For 30 years, Richard Vance denied his daughter Maya. He paid her mother to disappear, signed away his rights, and built a new life with a new family. But the evidence we will present today shows that he never stopped loving her, that he watched her from afar, proud of her achievements, that he wrote her a letter, unsent, expressing his regret and his hope that someday she'd forgive him, and that he made a will, 20 years ago, leaving everything to his firstborn child, his daughter Maya. Sarah's lawyer, a sharp man named Harrison, gave a polished rebuttal. My clients are the legitimate children of Richard Vance. The will before this court is clear and valid. The plaintiff is a stranger, a product of an affair, with no legal or moral claim to this estate. We ask the court to dismiss this case and allow my clients to finally put their father to rest. The first witness was the handwriting expert who authenticated my father's unsent letter. It was his handwriting, his voice, his pain. The second witness was my father's former business partner, a man named David who'd known him for 40 years. He testified about my father's guilt, his regret, his secret visits to my school plays, my graduations, my life. He'd come back from those trips with tears in his eyes, David said. He'd talk about you, about how proud he was, about how he wished things were different. But he was trapped. His wife, his other children, his reputation. He couldn't find a way out. The courtroom was silent. Sarah and Michael stared straight ahead, their faces pale. The third witness was my Aunt Rachel. She walked to the stand with a photo album clutched to her chest. Your Honor, she began, her voice shaking, I watched my sister raise Maya alone. I watched her struggle, sacrifice, and love with everything she had. And I watched Maya grow into a remarkable woman, despite being rejected by the man who should have loved her most. She opened the album and held up a photo. This is Maya at her high school graduation. See that man in the back row, wearing a hat and sunglasses? That's Richard. He came.
He watched.
He never told anyone. Another photo. This is Maya at her college graduation. There he is again in the back, trying to hide. Another. This is Maya's first teaching job. He sent flowers anonymously, of course. I still have the card. The gallery murmured. Sarah's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled. Rachel turned to face Sarah and Michael. Your father loved Maya. He loved her his whole life. He was just too afraid to show it. Don't let his fear be the last word. When Rachel stepped down, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. The testimony continued for 2 more days. Witness after witness painted a picture of a man torn between 2 families, 2 lives, 2 versions of himself. The evidence was overwhelming. Richard Vance had never stopped loving his firstborn daughter. Sarah and Michael's lawyers fought back, but their case was crumbling. The unsent letter, the secret visits, the second will, all of it pointed to a truth they couldn't escape. On the 3rd day, the judge called a recess. She'd heard enough. She needed time to deliberate. I spent that night with Aunt Rachel, holding hands, praying for a miracle. The next morning, we returned to the courtroom for the verdict. The judge entered, her face unreadable. The courtroom held its breath. I have reviewed the evidence carefully, she began. The unsent letter, the testimony of witnesses, the second will, the pattern of secret visits, all of it leads to one conclusion. Richard Vance intended to provide for his daughter Maya. His later will, signed under pressure from his wife, does not reflect his true wishes. Sarah gasped. Michael's face went white. Therefore, I am ruling that the second will is valid and enforceable. Maya Vance is entitled to her father's entire estate, as it existed at the time of that will, plus a proportionate share of the assets accumulated since. A full accounting will be ordered to determine the exact amount. The gallery erupted. Reporters rushed for the doors. Sarah burst into tears. Michael sat frozen, his world crumbling around him. I sat in my seat, unable to move, as Priya squeezed my arm and whispered, "You did it." The aftermath was chaotic. Sarah and Michael immediately announced they would appeal. The media frenzy intensified. I became a public figure overnight, the secret daughter who'd won against the legitimate heirs. But the victory felt hollow. I'd won the money, yes. But I'd also lost something, the hope that my father's family might someday accept me. Sarah and Michael made it clear. I was the enemy, the interloper, the gold digger who'd stolen their inheritance. A week after the ruling, I got a letter, handwritten, on expensive stationery, from Sarah. "Maya,
You've won.
congratulations. I hope the money keeps you warm at night. You'll never be one of us. You'll never be part of this family. You're just a reminder of our father's greatest mistake." Sarah. I read the letter, then folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. I didn't respond. What was there to say? The appeal took 18 months. 18 months of legal maneuvering, expensive lawyers, and endless waiting. Sarah and Michael had hired a new team, a high-powered firm with a reputation for overturning difficult cases. They argued that the judge had erred, that the second will was outdated, that my father's unsent letter was inadmissible hearsay. Priya fought back with everything she had, but the appeals court was unpredictable. I spent those months in a strange limbo, not quite victorious, not quite defeated, just waiting for the other shoe to drop. During that time, I tried to live my life. I went back to teaching, spent time with friends, even started dating a little. But the case hung over everything, a constant weight I couldn't shake. Aunt Rachel was my rock. She'd call every week, check in, remind me that I was strong enough to handle whatever came. "You've survived 30 years without them," she'd say. "This is just more of the same." But it wasn't the same. This was different. This was about acknowledgement, about finally being seen. If the appeals court overturned the ruling, I'd be erased again. This time by the law itself. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in March. I sat in the courtroom, watching as the appeals judges, 3 of them, stern and imposing, listened to arguments. Sarah and Michael sat on the other side, their faces cold, their eyes avoiding mine. Their lawyer argued passionately. The second will was too old, he said. My father had clearly changed his mind. The unsent letter was just that, unsent, never delivered, evidence of nothing. Priya countered with the testimony, the secret visits, the decades of hidden love. "This man watched his daughter grow up from the shadows," she said. "He wrote her a letter expressing his love and regret. He made a will leaving her everything. The later will was signed under pressure, not conviction. The lower court's ruling was just and should stand." The judges asked questions, probed the evidence, seemed genuinely engaged. But their faces gave nothing away. After 2 hours, the hearing ended. The judges said they'd issue a ruling within 90 days. I went home and waited. 90 days. 3 months of hoping, fearing, wondering. I barely slept, barely ate, just existed in a state of suspended animation. Then on a Tuesday afternoon, Priya called. "The ruling is in. Can you come to my office?" I drove there in a daze. When I arrived, Priya was waiting, her face unreadable. "They upheld the lower court's decision," she said. "You win. The money is yours." I collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down my face. It was over. Finally, truly over. The aftermath was different this time. Sarah and Michael, defeated, retreated from public view. They sold their shares of the estate, moved to different cities, tried to rebuild their lives. I never heard from them again. The money, over $4 million after everything was settled, sat in my bank account, a strange and heavy presence. I didn't know what to do with it. I'd never expected to be rich. I'd never wanted to be rich. I just wanted to be acknowledged. I donated a significant portion to charities that support single mothers and children from broken homes. I set up a scholarship in my mother's name. I bought a small house, nothing fancy, just a place to call my own. And I kept my father's unsent letter, framed, on my wall. A reminder that love can exist even when it can't be expressed. A reminder that I was always his daughter, even when he couldn't say it. But the story wasn't over. A month after the final ruling, I got a call from a woman I didn't know. Her name was Emily, and she claimed to be my half-sister. Emily and I met at a coffee shop in a neutral city, halfway between our homes. She was younger than me, 28, with our father's eyes and my mother's nervous energy. We stared at each other across the table, two strangers bound by blood and secrets. "I didn't know about you," she said softly. "Not until the news coverage. I saw your face, and I knew. You looked just like him." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I didn't know about you either. But I'm glad I do now." We talked for hours, sharing stories, filling in the gaps, building a bridge across decades of silence. Emily was the product of another affair, another secret, another woman my father had loved and left. Her mother had raised her alone, just like mine. She'd grown up knowing his name, seeing his face, wondering why he'd never claimed her. When the news of the inheritance battle broke, she'd recognized me instantly. Same eyes, same chin, same haunted look. "I thought about reaching out sooner," she said. "But I was scared. Scared you'd reject me, like he rejected us." "I could never reject you," I said. "You're my sister, the only family I have left." We spent the next few days together, exploring the city, sharing our histories, building a relationship from scratch. It was strange and beautiful and painful, all at once. I told her about the money, about the scholarships, about the house I'd bought. She told me about her job as a nurse, her tiny apartment, her dreams of going back to school. "I could help with that," I said. "The money, it's more than I need. I'd love to help you." She shook her head. "I didn't come here for money. I came here for you. For family." I understood. The money had been a weapon, a shield, a proof of existence. But it wasn't what mattered. What mattered was this. Two sisters, finally finding each other. We stayed in touch after that meeting. Called every week, visited when we could, built a relationship that grew stronger with time. She came to my house for holidays. I went to hers. We told our children about each other, created new traditions, filled the gaps that our father had left. The money, eventually, I used to set up a trust for both of us. For our children, our futures, our dreams. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about building something new. My father's unsent letter still hangs on my wall. I look at it sometimes, remembering the man who loved me from afar but couldn't find the courage to say it. I don't forgive him. Not entirely. But I understand him. And understanding, I've learned, is its own kind of peace. The micro-niche here isn't just paternity disputes or inheritance law. It's about the long, painful work of finding family in the most unexpected places. It's about learning that blood doesn't always mean belonging, but sometimes it can. It's about a father who couldn't face the truth and daughters who finally found each other in the wreckage. Have you ever been rejected by family only to find connection elsewhere? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's talk about the families we're born into and the families we choose. And if this story of DNA, inheritance, and hard-won sisterhood resonated with you, share it. Sometimes, the most important discoveries aren't about money. They're about love. Thanks for listening.